successful in meeting inflation targeting. And also the questions, I think, whether this inflation targeting regime, more flexible inflation targeting, whether it is relevant today, whether there have been debates going on, what are changes that we need to move forward as central bank is. And also there are new challenges, like, for example, Indian Reserve Bank and Indian government is internationalization of INR is one of the new initiatives that we have seen. India is taking the lead. That is also to address some of the challenges that are emerging because of all these other uncertainties. And also new technologies like central bank digital currencies. That's also new technology coming up. And also other part, the new one is the role of digital financial services, especially this part of the world. Is very important that Central Bank of Central Reserve Bank of India is taking the lead. These are the areas we hope that Governor Malhotra can touch on, also anything else, especially on the monetary policy, price stability, and the role of central banks in these uncertain times and turbulence times. And on the other hand, we have the Governor Trichet. This is a very well experienced governor, being Governor of Bank of France and also the ECB. For a long period, during his period, he has had enough exposure, especially to banking issues in Europe, and also economic crisis in Greece, and also his role during that period is quite important, and also his kind of thinking about the current new challenges in the global economy. I think, I hope that he can contribute in this area. With that, let me first invite Governor Malhotra to share his thoughts, and then followed by Governor Trichet, and then we will have a few question and answers, and also if time permits, we will open up for a few questions as well. Thank you.
Governor Veera Singhe, dear Jean, Claude, all participants, distinguished audience, a very good afternoon to all of you. It's indeed a pleasure for me to be here amidst all of you. The theme of the session could not have been more apt. This is a topic which is at the forefront of all central bankers navigating the complexities of our current global landscape. The last 2 decades have been, to put it mildly, a lesson in humility for the central bankers. They have traversed through a past period of deceptive calm to one of perpetual crisis management, one after the other, in the last 2 decades or so. The standard models that the central bankers have relied on, which assume a certain level of stability, predictable relationships, they are creaking under the strain of these new realities. Their explanatory and predictive power is being questioned. This brings us to the crucial point, which is the role of the central banks. The very nature of their roles has evolved in many economies, from fine-tuning stable economies to act now as first line of defense against a series of unprecedented and sometimes overlapping global shocks. This reminds me of an old mariner's wisdom. You cannot control the storm, but you can certainly steer the ship. That's what the central bankers are meant for. This is the essence of modern central banking, navigating through turbulent waters with a steady hand, guided by the stars of stability, price stability, and financial stability. As some of you may recall, From the mid-1980s until 2007, it seemed that the central banks had virtually tamed the business cycles. Advanced economies enjoyed a long spell of low inflation and stable growth. The intellectual consensus that converged around frameworks like flexible inflation targeting. But the global financial crisis of 2008 and 9 was a rude awakening, giving way to a period characterized by unprecedented global shocks and heightened uncertainty. It was a classic Minsky moment, a sudden, brutal collapse of asset prices after a very long period of prosperity but hidden debt accumulation. That crisis opened the door to an era defined by relentless series of shocks of diverse origins, from the financial sector crisis in the US, which exposed deep-seated fragilities in the global banking system, to the sovereign debt crisis in Europe, which threatened the very fabric of the monetary union, the taper tantrum episode of 2013, which sent shock waves through emerging market economies like ours, and more recently, a drastic U-turn in the global trade policy environment, reversing decades of integration. The last 5 years in particular have been defined by overlapping supply-side shocks that have left significant scars on growth. From the COVID-19 pandemic and its after effects, the Russia-Ukraine war and its spillovers, and to the very frequent adverse weather events. These are not traditional demand-driven cyclical fluctuations that monetary policy was well equipped to handle. These were different, these were unprecedented, these were not something which one anticipated. These are complex, exogenous events that simultaneously dampened economic activity and fueled at the same time multi-decadal high inflation in many economies, presenting policymakers with a devil's choice. India too was not spared from their after effects. COVID pandemic resulted in India's real GDP contracting by about 5.8% in 2021. Subsequently, adverse weather effects and spillovers from the Russia-Ukraine war pushed headline inflation above the upper tolerance band of 6%. In 4 quarters in 2022, all 4 quarters of 2022, first quarter of 23, driven by the sharp increases in the international commodity prices as well as the domestic food prices, which was accompanied with spillovers from food to core inflation. How did India deal with it? In situations where an adverse tail event materializes, the swiftness and the proactiveness of policy measures shape its efficacy and influences how fast an economy recovers. The flexibility embedded in India's, as we call it, the flexible inflation targeting, enabled it to focus on the growth recovery during the pandemic, even though inflation was rising, and then quickly shift gears to maintain price stability in the face of heightened price shocks that followed. Our mandate allowed us to look through some of the initial impact of the supply shocks while remaining vigilant against the anchoring of inflation expectations. A monetary policy response by the Reserve Bank to counter the devastating impact of COVID-19 pandemic was multifold preemptive and decisive. First, it preemptively reduced its key policy repo rate to its lowest level ever in the 10-year history now of inflation targeting. Accompanying it was a slew of liquidity augmenting measures, again unprecedented, very timely, aimed at ensuring ample liquidity in the financial markets for all sectors and thereby prevent seizures and credit freezes that were occurring in the financial markets in many of the other economies due to the liquidity stress. Amidst the uncertainty, communication, the other pillar of monetary policy, and forward guidance became key elements to the Reserve Bank's monetary policy toolkit. The Reserve Bank's forward guidance was usually state contingent, looking to and linked to the evolving macroeconomic outlook, but the Reserve Bank blended it as needed with time contingent guidance to reinforce the MPC's commitment to an accommodative stance. For example, the uses of phrases like as long as necessary to revive growth and mitigate the impact of COVID-19. On the whole, the Reserve Bank approach was balanced and prudent. The liquidity injection was targeted with preset end dates, allowing for an automatic and non-disruptive unwinding as the economy recovered. By doing so, it avoided the pitfall of a liquidity trap, very difficult to get out. Once having injected liquidity, how to withdraw it, what's the time? Preset dates allowed the Reserve Bank to do this. Furthermore, at the same time, while liquidity was injected, the lending standards were not diluted in terms of the counterparties or the collateral requirements, which again is a crucial lesson from the past crises. By 2022, even as the economy was recovering from the pandemic, it was hit by the global spillovers of the war and the impact of various adverse climate-related events on the domestic agricultural production and food prices. As mentioned earlier, the targeted nature of our earlier monetary stimulus allowed for an orderly, automatic unwinding. I hope I am audible to everyone. I could hear some voices. Furthermore, fiscal policy also shifted gears to the path of consolidation as the economy progressively strengthened. These factors helped Reserve Bank to be relatively better prepared to face the sharp pickup in inflationary pressures in the year 2022. Monetary policy preemptively moved to a tightening phase, beginning with the change in the stance to withdrawal of accommodation in April 2022, followed by a front-loaded rate increases starting with an off-cycle hike in May 2022. Communication from the Reserve Bank reiterated initially the firm resolve to pull back headline inflation within the tolerance band, closer to the target, and thereafter to progressively align headline inflation to the target rate, and for a durable alignment of inflation with the target while supporting growth. This helped anchor medium-term expectations firmly to the target rate over time. A standout feature of anti-inflationary stance during this period was that of exemplary monetary fiscal coordination. As you are aware, 46% of the Indian CPI basket is food, mostly supply driven, and over there the fiscal response, fiscal management becomes very important because monetary policy has limited impact on supply side So fiscal response, therefore, was not just in terms of keeping aggregate demand counter-cyclical through its adherence to the fiscal consolidation path, but also of supply-side measures which sought to alleviate production or supply shortfalls and their impact on retail prices. Monetary policy, as I mentioned, would be ineffective to deal with the supply-side sources of inflation. Alongside these measures, monetary policy focused on limiting second-round effects of high food inflation on core inflation or underlying inflation trends. These monetary fiscal interactions help to balance the growth inflation considerations judiciously. A major issue that emerging market economies like India had to face during this period was the large fluctuations of capital flows, often triggered by advanced economy monetary policies. In this context, RBI actively pursued macroprudential policies to contain any domestic financial stability risks triggered by these flows. One of the key learning for the Reserve Bank from its crisis management policies was the importance of a well-laid out exit strategy from exceptional measures. This was also true for the supply-side interventions by the government, to know when to roll back the supply-side interventions, and similarly the demand-side interventions, so that as and when, they are reversed as the shocks wane out. In an age of uncertainty, the swiftness, nimbleness, and pragmatic approach of RBI's monetary policies has stood us in good stead. By 24-25, India is not only the fastest large economies growing in terms of growth, but also by February 2025, inflation was well within our target of 4%. Major financial collapses or recessions have been averted. Now, despite higher US import tariffs, trade restrictions, uncertainties going forward, global economy has stayed surprisingly resilient till now. Growth has been upbeat, defying projections, even though uncertainty has become a pervasive element of a contemporary discourse. Its tangible effects on real economy have thus far been muted. We have more to see as to how it unfolds. Global economy will, however, perform below its true potential for some time to come on the diverging growth trajectories across economies. Moreover, current trade policy environment and restrictions could damage, perhaps permanently, growth in some of the economies. Fiscally, almost every country today is quite stretched. It is not apparent how the situation could be normalized, especially if the world goes into a phase of lower economy growth. This is a risk for all of us, particularly when it is not accompanied by high inflation, though some of the large economies still have inflations above target, but it's not too high. Only some fiscal risks are being priced in by the bond markets, and equities' continued rise in bond issuance have steepened several bond yield curves in the advanced economies, while central banks in advanced economies are concerned about the elevated levels of public debt in their economies and worry about a disruptive resolution. Full risks perhaps are not being priced in. This raises a specter of fiscal dominance, where monetary policy could become constrained by the need to ensure debt sustainability. Equity markets too seem to be a bit complacent, and I'm talking here about the global stocks generally. They have been particularly buoyant, led by technology stocks, leading to worries. that a correction might be in the offing. In all likelihood, the tariffs, combined with large and stretched public debts almost everywhere in the world, will have some material impact on the respective economies and therefore on the global economy. As of now, it seems these risks are perhaps not being priced in the equity markets. And there is a greater tolerance, too, for inflation. While inflation is currently range-bound across most advanced countries, it is still running, as I mentioned earlier, somewhat higher than the targets. Policymakers are showing tolerance to it, with many central banks now in a gentle easing cycle as they witness some slowdown in the growth in economy. The US Fed, for example, cut rates in September, which could be seen more as preemptive, with unemployment in US still at a low level. All these raise the question whether the central banks will be able to protect the credibility of their frameworks if inflationary pressures remain persistent. Despite geopolitical tensions that would have sent oil prices soaring in an earlier decade, they have been very range-bound. This could be due to a decline in oil intensity of GDP, not just in India, but across the world. Perhaps gold prices now are showing the kind of movement that oil used to, that is acting as a barometer of global uncertainty. Overall, despite heightened uncertainty, global financial conditions now recently have eased. Near-time global financial stability risks have reduced or are not apparent at this time, and the banking sectors, fortunately, are very resilient in most of the countries in the world. Where does India stand in this era of turbulence and heightened uncertainty? India's macroeconomic fundamentals have remained very strong, built assiduously over the decades. We have strong forex reserves, low inflation since February, a narrow current account deficit, a very credible fiscal consolidation path, and very strong balance sheets of our banks and corporates. This is to be attributed to the steadfast attention to ensuring macroeconomic stability, price stability, financial stability, and even policy stability, despite changes in government. Continuity in reforms momentum, adoption of global best frameworks tailored to our domestic needs and national priorities. It is the combined efforts of the governments, policymakers, regulators, regulated entities. All in all, despite odds, recent odds, the economy seems well settled into an equilibrium of resilient growth. This is quite a feat for a large emerging market and makes India stand out as an anchor of stability in a volatile world. Thank you. Jai Hind.
So first of all, let me say that how happy I am to have been invited by NK here. It's a pleasure. I am very happy to see a lot of friends in this room and a lot of very important thinkers. So turbulent times, central banking in turbulent times, it's certainly a very, very important issue. I would say very well treated by my predecessor, Nandalan and Sanjay. I share practically very much all what they say, but I will try to introduce my own contribution to a better understanding of this particular time, a time which is from time to time changing daily to the hour when you listen exactly to what is said by an executive branch, particular executive branch, which is changing perspective very often. It reminds me the story of the two gentlemen that were in Scotland, far away from any newspaper or newsstand, so they had no information. They decided to go in a small village. There was a newsstand there, and they said, could we have the Financial Times, madam? And the lady said, do you want today Financial Times or yesterday Financial Times? They were a little bit surprised. They said, of course, today Financial Times. Ah, said the lady, if you want today Financial Times, why don't you come back tomorrow? And the fact is that it is very important to have the news of today, not the news of yesterday in the present world. So I'll try to go through turbulent times through three ways, if I may. One would be to try to re-examine what has happened over the last period of time since the Great Moderation, which was mentioned by the previous speaker, and to try to put in perspective what I would call, it seems to me that it is the best metaphor I can use, the roller coaster that the central banks had to go through during this period. Then I will try to concentrate on a number of points that are illustrating the present difficulty and the enormous, I would say, set, I count 7 of them, but there are more, dimension which are complicating the task of central banks today. And then I will conclude perhaps on suggesting an interpretation for what I consider a very important lesson drawn from the roller coaster I mentioned. So, very rapidly, we have not a lot of time. The Great Moderation, we have the memory of the Great Moderation. It's also something which is quite striking because it demonstrates that you can have a pretty good consensus of the mainstream economists, of the mainstream central banks, of the mainstream authorities, and then sharply and abruptly you realize that it was untrue. It's true that we did not foresee the terrible crisis of the subprime and then Lehman Brothers, which was a global crisis, but a very peculiar global crisis because the epicenter was in the advanced economy. Epicenter in the advanced economy, it was the first time since World War II. The previous crises were very often located in the developing world, in the emerging world, not at the very center of the financial sector of the world. And so beware of consensus. Beware of the sentiment that things are now forever in a different perspective. It was untrue after the Great Moderation. Then we had, a difficult task to address, and I spent 4 years of my life trying to address the difficulty that were stemming from the collapse of Lehman Brothers and the subprime issue, with a lot of difficulty in the euro area. We went through it with imagination and creativity. And then the main problem we had, myself and my successor, was the threat of the materialization of the deflationary risk. So we came from the sentiment that the territory was flat, if I may, Great Moderation. Then we had a permanent threat of deflation. And we tried to fight against deflation, also very boldly, very actively. I have to say, all those economies that had room for maneuver were very bold in, I would say, utilizing both monetary policy and fiscal policy. But again, one lesson to be drawn. At the end of this period, it was very clear in the eyes of the mainstream, a large mainstream of economists, that inflation was totally inexistent, that we should forget about inflation, that it was very clear that we were in a different world. The world had changed, and it was a world without any inflation. And of course, again, it was a very dangerous, I would say, belief, because we had the surge of inflation coinciding with the recovery, post-COVID recovery, say. And again, we had a very high level of inflation, more than 10% in the US, around 10% in Europe, and the world over for many reasons, even if, again, the concentration on the advanced economy was very clear, it seems to me. It was more or less the same challenge than we had at the moment of the first and the second oil shock. But at the time, many central banks were loose and practiced benign neglect. It was not the case this time. And I have to mention the fact that all central banks in the world, and I praise particularly, of course, the central bankers that are in this room and in this stage, particularly India and Sri Lanka, but we had also very hard work done by, I would say, the Fed and the ECB, with 11 increase of interest rates by the Fed after the surge of inflation, 10 by the ECB, and it proved that the central bank were able to remain active, vigilant, not let things go as it was the case in the past. And at the moment I'm speaking, I would say that everything is not won, but we still are fighting for price stability, with success in India, clearly, and the flexible inflation targeting is very effective. We have inflation which went down quite well in Europe. In the US, it is a little bit more difficult for many reasons that are explainable. And of course, we also have the challenge of the executive branch. So we will see where we go. Clearly, the metaphor of the roller coaster remains a good metaphor, and the only major lesson I'm drawing from this period is that you should be vigilant permanently. Permanent vigilance is absolutely of the essence, and it seems to me this is what was said by the previous central banker speaker, that there is no case for being tranquille and thinking that things will go by themselves. Second point I wanted to make, the difficulty of the present time. Of course, I would first put the dramatic change of the global perspective that we have. We were in a rule-based international order since World War II, has been said, and we don't know where we stand now. So there is a dramatic change, a long-term, very long-term change in perspective, and we don't know where we go. This is something which is highly uncertain, a kind of Nietzschean uncertainty, if I may. So that's the first thing. I hope very much that I am a little bit dramatizing things, because what I heard here, and this morning in particular, was a little bit reassuring on the will of many, many countries to maintain order, to maintain a rule-based international system. But it's clear that it is not shared by all of us at the present moment. So I will not elaborate. Maybe it could be interesting for questions. I list the 7 points I was mentioning, which are in the perspective of the today's central banks. One, aggravation of geostrategic tensions in many places in the world. Second, weaponization of economic and financial relationship, associated, of course, with my remark on the change, the dramatic change of concept. Third, slowing down of globalization, which is it started before the drama I am mentioning and the dramatic change of concept, which is in the air. But slowing down of globalization is very important for central banks because it means additional pressure for inflation. I mentioned the green transition, also very, very important, not only for the planet, for the spaceship in which we are, but also because it is something which has consequences on inflation, in my opinion. It's not without cost. I would mention also a political element which is very, very important for central banks, which is the political unsatisfaction of the lower middle class, which was very, very clear in the United States of America and contributed to change dramatically the executive branch and the nature of the executive branch. But it is observed in all countries, emerging and developed, advanced and developing. So there we have a major problem, which is a major problem also for central banks, it seems to me. The fact that the Republican administration took over the Democratic administration with the support of a large part of the lower middle class means something very, very important. Then we have, of course, all the technological shocks that India knows better than anybody because India is at the heart of the engineering of these technological shocks, the deep learning, AI, generalized digitalization, and of course this has consequences on productivity, on the march of the economy. It's something which is absolutely of the essence. We have also particularly for central banks, the cryptocurrency challenge, the stable coins challenge, all these new technologies that are of extreme importance and might change dramatically, to be frank, particularly because of the push that is clear coming both from the private sector, for reasons that are obvious, and also from the public sector, from some executive branches that are pushing and pushing and pushing. And it seems to me that it has to be examined very carefully, not rejecting, of course, technological progress and prowesses, but trying to be, again, as vigilant and as wise and rational as possible. That being said, I go to my conclusion. I wanted to draw your attention to the following. In the moment of the financial crisis, say, caricature, 08, 09, 10, 11, 12, we had this surprise of being in highly turbulent waters when unexpected. One of the lessons which was drawn during that period was that the anchoring of expectations was of extreme importance. And of course, particularly anchoring of inflation expectations. We had already, of course, inflation targeting concept. We had the European having said that they had a definition of price stability, the famous 2% over the medium term. And what I would like to draw your attention to is that not only this definition of price stability, as I like very much to present this, the new concept, but also the idea that it should be generalized, not only to the developing world, and emerging world, but also to the advanced economy. The fact that the US decided to adopt in 2012 2% as its definition of price stability in the medium run. The fact that Japan decided to consider 2% as its definition of price stability over the medium run, completed the fact that 4 major advanced economies that are in the basket of the SDR, the special drawing rights, together with the renminbi, but those 4 had the same definition of price stability after the decision taken in Washington in 2012 and in Tokyo in 2013. The 4 currencies that are issued by advanced economies that are in the basket of the SDR have the same definition of price stability. And in my opinion, it is something which is currently under-assessed by academia, because academia consider each country, each entity for itself. But the fact that at the global level, what is still the core of the international monetary system, waiting, of course, for numerous emerging economies, currencies to join in, but at the present moment, the SDR is, I would say, an emblematic core. Then we have the same definition of price stability. And my understanding is that it played a very important role in permitting us, I mean the US, Europe, and of course the other currencies that are in this basket, to progressively eliminate the inflation that had come up. And I put part of the credit of the success of central banks, not only the central banks I have mentioned, but also all central banks of the world, namely avoiding to embark in a new round, a new episode of high inflation. I put part of the credit on this, I would say, de facto, not de jure, but de facto structural change in the core of the international monetary system. I say that to terminate on a positive mark, because most of my remarks were rather negative. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, both Governor Malhotra and Governor Trichet. So let me, I think we have some time just to basically raise some few comments and the questions, especially start with Governor RBI, Governor Malhotra. We heard in the morning the Minister of Finance talking about the medium to long-term sustainable growth of 8%. Is obviously, we all know, is a challenging and ambitious target that needs a lot of structural reforms implemented for us to move, for India to move in that kind of a very high medium to long-term growth path. So in this kind of target in mind by the government, then obviously other part is the central bank independence and accountability. We know now central banks are increasingly, even in our region, becoming more independent and also with a lot more accountability and transparency. So with this democratic accountability and independence, and also looking at the ambitious targets of the very high growth rates, especially in India, and obviously there may have some conflict between the central bank, may have short-term priorities in terms of stabilization versus medium to long-term growth. So I think, how do you see this kind of conflict, and how do you see going forward for the RBI? How do you see the address, or what are the things that in central bank mind to address if this is theirs, if I call it as conflict, or if it's not the conflict, but how you align with, especially with the transparent and accountable central bank with independence?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. India did grow, about 8% last 3-4 years. So in that sense, it gives us the confidence, to the finance minister and to all of us that we can certainly, grow 7 to 8% long term. As you are all aware, the Reserve Bank has the primary mandate of price stability, but it is conditional, or at the same breath, it talks about keeping in mind growth. So while the primary focus certainly for us is growth, is price stability story, growth also is kept in mind by the Reserve Bank. Independence, this is a question which now has engaged the attention of the world, especially what is happening in some of the countries, advanced countries. And in India, we have a very unique, I think the reference here, again, when we are talking about growth, inflation dynamics, it's more relevant to the monetary policy. And so over here, we have a very unique kind of a framework, where the framework, of course, has been now embedded in our legislation after the amendment which were carried out in the RBI Act, which talks about this inflation targeting as the primary target for the central bank, for the Reserve Bank. But then it's the government which sets the target. It's not the Reserve Bank which sets the target for itself. So over there, RBI, the central bank, has a role. It is consulted. Every 5 years we do a review, as you are all aware, and we are in the midst of a review. So while it comes to setting of the target, there is no independence that the Reserve Bank has. It only has a view which is communicated to the government, and the final buck is with the government. Coming to the operating tool for it, which is the policy repo rate, again over there, as embedded now in our Act, there is a Monetary Policy Committee, so it's not the RBI, it is the Monetary Policy Committee with internal members from RBI. RBI has a major say over there, but then external members too have an equal say. So over there, the Reserve Bank has more of an, if you call it, independence or responsibility. The responsibility shifts from the central government, which had target fixing primary role, to the operational target policy rate being set by primary role, shifting to the central bank. The third lever, or the third piece in this framework, is how to attain the operations which are to be done to align the operating target to the policy repo rate. And it's over there that there is complete flexibility or independence which is given to the central bank. And it is the central bank that decides how to go about doing it. And even over here, the independence is, while there is independence, at the same time, there is accountability embedded into it through a report which is to be sent to the government in case successively the target is breached. So while independence, of course, is necessary for monetary policy, one can see, how in India we have tried to balance these goals of independence on the one hand and accountability, again, which goes hand in hand for any independence that you may give. So I think it has worked very well. Talking about independence, it's important not only for institutions, it's important for individuals within an institution, within government, within RBI, and this is certainly a virtue, a feature which we all need to promote and protect, and India has done very well in giving the Reserve Bank, its central bank, the independence where it is required. But with accountability features are built into it.
Thank you, Governor. My next question to Governor Trichet, as a long-serving at the ECB and the French Central Bank, and we know when the currency union, the euro was introduced some time ago, so the expectations was that this currency certainly expectations was that will emerge as a alternative reserve currency and also alternative trading currency, at least basically moving as alternative to the US dollar from that point. But historically, if you look at now, it has expectations. If that was expectation, it has not basically not reached to that level. But when you look at the current global turbulences, and usually in the past, when there's a global uncertainty, what we have seen the safe haven has been mainly to US dollar and the gold historically. But this time, what we are seeing, the gold obviously has gone way high, above all central banks are moving into gold as a safe haven and also as a asset class. Whereas the current cycle, we have not seen the US dollar as becoming that kind of safe haven. And is this an opportunity, in your view, for euro to become at least gradually move into that kind of as a safe haven for global investors, given the uncertainty, especially in the US dollar, with all the BRICS are now trying to emerge as coming up with all the reserve currencies, internationalization of local currency also, or another kind of effort taking place, and also the gold obviously has become a winner there. And also other part is that instead of the US dollar, now we are seeing the virtual currencies also now gaining traction. Sometimes some of the private investors are now relying or keeping basically more weight on the virtual currencies, although small. So what is your view? Isn't this you think it's opportunity for euro to gain that traction, to become more of a safe haven or the trading currency in the global trading system or investment systems? What's your view? So based on your experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much indeed. A lot of questions implicitly or explicitly in your remarks. First of all, let me only say that as far as we are concerned, the central bank, the ECB, has not only operational independence, but I would say full independence. That being said, of course, in all our meeting of the Governing Council, you have the presence of the representative of the Eurogroup, namely the chief, if I may, of the Ministers of Finance. He's present, can be present, he's always invited. You have also the commissioner, the competent commissioner. We are reporting, the ECB is reporting to the European Parliament at least 5 times a year. And there is a lot of contact and, I would say, response to questions of all kinds by Parliament, by the Commission, and so forth. But the decision is really taken entirely by the Governing Council itself. And I think that it has worked pretty well, because the argument against this kind of full independence is generally that the central bank will not take into account the environment, the difficulty of the new things that are coming, would stick to, I would say, previous ways of looking at things and not be sufficiently aware of the difficulty. I think the ECB demonstrated in the major crisis that we have known her capacity to deal with extraordinary new challenges. And I think that we have now a very good support by the people of Europe. By the way, I insist on that, because when we started the euro, there was a generalized countries, the world over, of course, but also in Europe. It was a very close call. In France, it's very well known. We had a referendum and it was a terribly close call. In Germany, the same, because it was a very close call in the Bundesrat, the province, the Länder, I would say, assembly. So now when we ask the people of Europe, they say that they approve of the euro by between 80%, 70% and 80%. So from that standpoint, it's a real success.
Yeah,
now,
thank you, Governor. I think we have only 2 minutes. I would like to give 2 minutes for the at least one question because of the just opportunity for audience to ask at least only one question, please, in 2 minutes. So please, Professor Singh. Okay.
Thank you, Jean-Claude. If you had your way, and I'm not saying you will have your way, but if you had your way, how would you like the relationship between European Parliament and the European Central Bank to be recalibrated in any way by modifying the basic objective of combining multiple things, of which, of course, inflation, but growth equally would be an important variable? Do you think that, given uncertainties, the G factor has an increasingly more dominant role to play?
I would say...
You have 1 minute, please.
Yeah, I understand. I would say I will not change anything, first. Second, the central bank, according to the treaty, is supposed, not forgetting her first mandate of price stability, to support all the objectives of Europe, including, of course, growth, including the green transition and so forth. My understanding is that the necessary but not sufficient condition to have maximized growth is to have price stability, credible price stability in the medium term. Of course, it does not suffice. It's a necessary but not a sufficient condition. But I would be against the two objectives, which I trust creates a problem in democratic terms, because you would give an independent institution the independent authority to make a choice, to make an arbitrage, say, between price stability and growth. It seems to me too much for, again, an independent institution.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Governor. So with that, I think we conclude the session. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much. I request you all to remain seated, please. We'll begin our next session in a minute. Please remain seated. Request you all to settle down, please.
Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello.
मैं हालत नहीं है
प्रोग्राम चालू हो गया
Filers, you're able to get one into the court system, but it takes 5, 6, 7 years to dispose through processes that are long and Byzantine, that creates a massive discouragement. So you need procedures that are fair and that are effectively administered. Third, the outcomes need to be reliable and consistent. So courts work by precedent in a common law system, but even in civil law systems, precedent plays an important role. And the decisions, the way a code is interpreted and the way it's applied have to be seen as fair from case to case and not arbitrary or different for reasons that do not have to do with either of the Fourth, the obvious is a reputation, a strong reputation for non-corruption. Nobody's going to come into a system if they don't know whether they'll be able to control the outcome because someone else is going to do a payoff, or because they will have to do one, or many other possible ways in which courts may be corrupt. The fifth, which is to say the quality of the judges has to be perceived as high to really attract people and to have them feel confident coming into a legal system. So that has very much to do with who is appointed, how they're appointed, what kind of background they bring to the bench, and so on. And then the sixth provision, which relates to the first one. I said the first one is access. You have to be able to get access to a court relatively quickly. The case has to be is speedy dispositions. Again, if you file a case and you're not going to get the outcome for 3, 4, 5 years, that's a massive discouragement to investing in the jurisdiction in the first place. So that cluster of qualities are essentially essential, and falling down very much on any one of them will create problems. Falling down on many creates a much larger problem. Second point I think that I would make is one way to deal with issues like this that is often adopted. If you have, as the United States has, for instance, almost only generalized courts, then you can often have problems in different classes of cases because the judges may not be deeply expert in all of the different classes. So you can create, and many countries do, even the United States does in certain instances, create specialized courts where judges are appointed for having a particular expertise that they then develop over time. And you can see how that strengthens almost all of the qualities that I mentioned. The judges can become respected, you have a greater likelihood of getting reliable, consistent results, et cetera, because you have a bench staffed by people who are not only well thought of, but are deep experts in the field in which they're adjudicating. A next quality or aspect that's often important, in addition to having these courts, is to have a well set up system of alternative dispute resolution attached to it. So that might be arbitration, it might be mediation, it can be both. But the opportunity for parties that have come into the system to agree upon an alternative procedure that is still within the system, that is even faster and less costly for them, but that is also reliable, is a very important aspect that can increase the quality of the adjudication and so the attractiveness of the courts. Typically, the judges who staff, typically you want to staff your alternative dispute resolution with judges, and ideally former judges. So well-respected judges who have retired from active service on the bench, but who serve as mediators or arbitrators is a hugely successful way to do this. Just two final points. One has to do with, again, something that follows. You need to attract the best people for the bench. If you want the bench to be respected, it needs to be staffed by high-quality people. You are in a market, so that means you do need to think about salaries, and you do need to pay judges, if not the same kind of salaries that they could make in practice, salaries that are high enough to make the job really worthwhile. And that needs to be accompanied with the kind of support that they have so that the job is comfortable and worth doing. And through those kinds of devices, you then build the prestige of the court, which itself becomes a quality that helps attract good judges. And again, we've seen the differences in systems that do that and systems that don't. In the United States, the federal bench is perceived as highly prestigious and highly attractive. The lower state courts are not, and there is a massive difference in the quality of the judges and the quality of the adjudications that you get. I hope nobody is here from any of the American states, but it is true. Just trust me on that. The last point I think I would touch on is you do need to worry both for the credibility of the court and for the reality of the way it works on some form of controlling the court, of managing the inevitable situations when there are questions or concerns about the reliability of a disposition, whether there was corruption, whether somebody has misbehaved. And of course, you would hope that that never happens, but you know it's going to. Now, one feature to remember in thinking about this, when you set up a bench like this, or any part of the government, you need to think about how you're going to balance the necessity of independence so that the actors can act consistent with whatever their mission is, and the need for a degree of accountability to the political system. If you look at any constitutional system, you'll see every branch of government has a balance between independence and accountability, and the balance can be different. Some branches you're going to lead more towards accountability, say in elected branches, elections that are more frequent, districts that are smaller, directions that are direct, and some you may want more forms of independence to balance that off, so you might make the election at a longer period, you might have a larger constituency, and so on. But even when it comes to courts, you have to think about balancing independence and accountability. You have to worry about a court that is too independent of the political system as much as you have to worry about a court that is too dependent on it. And again, this can be done in different ways. The most typical way is to try and make, globally this is to try and make the judges very independent in their decisions, but make the institution in which they sit one which can be controlled through the political system, typically in the form of appointments. So if you have staggered regular terms with some form of political appointment, but once on the bench, the judge is fully independent, that's just one mechanism that can be used for ensuring the independence of the judges in deciding cases, but making sure that the bench can't get completely out of sync with where the rest of the political system and the country are. There are various ways to do that, but you do need to think about it. When it comes to discipline, then, it's important not to have a disciplinary system that is either fully controlled by the political branches or fully controlled by the judiciary itself. So you need to find some way of mixing that control and keeping it both independent from each and accountable to both. A typical way to do that, for instance, is to have a disciplinary system that is independent, but whose members are appointed through some kind of consensus between the two branches, something like that. In any event, it is important to think about achieving that kind of mix of independence and accountability in terms of how you're going to control the bench once it's there, staying away from the notion of direct political control, but also away from the notion of complete judicial independence. And then lastly is on an ongoing basis, just putting into place systems for ongoing judicial training, both of the judges and of their administrators. So that, for me, would be the kind of package of things if you want the kind of court that will be very attractive. And as was mentioned in the opening statement, I think it's a point in time where the world could use something like this. A lot of the trusted international mediation organizations have lost a lot of credibility over the last couple of years. And if you want to do something to attract a lot of foreign investment into the country, you can hardly do better than to become one of the few four in the world where people want to bring their disputes if they're going to have a commercial disagreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. May I now request Sri Harish Salve to give his opening remarks.
Good afternoon. It's always such an education sitting next to Larry and hearing what he has to say. Picking up on his last point first, an independent judiciary is not necessarily an unaccountable judiciary. And I don't mean accountability in its pejorative sense. The political system makes sure that Parliament and the political executive refreshes itself every 5 years. Judges once appointed continue in office with security of tenure, and that security of tenure ensures judicial independence. So it is then the need in civil society once in a while to revisit how our judicial system is working and to discuss openly and candidly where the strengths lie, and more than that, where the failings have been, and try and address them. I'm not going to speak about the philosophical notions of the rule of law and the Constitution and the need to have a justice delivery system for every common man, etc. Let's focus on economic growth. We have now come to accept that the only way India can fulfill its dreams, the only way India can be true to the preamble to the Constitution, justice, social, economic, and political, to each Indian is through the vehicle of economic growth. If that's the vehicle by which we will reach the destination which our founding fathers laid for us, how do we get there? We have to get there by foreign investment. A dear friend who will be speaking to you later in the day, Mr. Rafael, we were driving here together and he gave me some figures. He's speaking on infrastructure finance. He says India needs roughly $3 trillion of infrastructure finance, of which a back-of-the-envelope calculation is $400 to $500 billion in the next few years of private equity. The problem in this is, will private equity come to a system where the legal system doesn't guarantee you either speed or certainty? Larry spoke of two things. It has to be within defined timelines, which are relatively short. Any dispute resolution has to be quickly sorted, and more so in the infrastructure space, which is so highly regulated. And certainty. You cannot have cases decided in accordance with the personal ideas of a judge. One of the greatest things I have seen in the English courts is you can safely predict which way a case is going to go. A good lawyer can always tell you which way a case is going to go. I'm afraid it's no longer so for India. So that's the important point. Today, I know if foreign investors look at a higher internal rate of return while making an investment in India, because your justice delivery system is slow, who's paying the price for that? Each one of us, each Indian consumer is paying the price for that. So improving the justice delivery system is not a question of spending $300 million or $500 million more on judges' salaries. It is reducing the risk of investment in India. And then we are talking of billions of dollars saved by a small investment in the justice delivery system. What are the things we need to look at? We need to look, and let's focus in the context of economic growth. We need to look, first of all, at a system in which a start to finish of a commercial dispute is a year or 18 months. If somebody looks at the cause list of the Bombay High Court, Bombay is India's biggest commercial center. If somebody looks at the cause list of the Bombay High Court, suits there have been lingering for decades. Now that's not promising at all. I'm not picking on the Bombay High Court. They have their problems. They have 4 judges hearing cases. And if you have only 4 judges hearing cases, work manufactures itself. They don't get time. They barely get to finish their ex parte ad interim applications. So we need a quantum increase in the number of judges. But if you need a quantum increase in the number of judges, it's not a numbers game. How do you attract legal talent? Which brings up the second issue which Larry mentioned. What about the salaries in judges? I think on last call, if I remember correctly, we aspired to have 50 judges per million of population, which is way below the average of 90 and 100 in the more developed countries. I believe the de facto rate is running somewhere between 12 and 15%. Why? If you go out of Delhi and Bombay, and if you go into the other big cities, and you go to the courts of first instance, your district judges, those courtrooms have empty chairs. Judges are not available. The legal talent is not willing to come and join. Now, as Larry rightly mentioned, nobody as a judge expects to make the same amount of money as a good commercial silk. But at the same time, there has to be a salary which attracts you to a job. And my own experience I can share with you very quickly. When I was Solicitor General, there was a challenge brought to the Supreme Court saying a national, in the district commission, they were not finding members. The judge summoned me as Solicitor General and said, do something about it. When I looked at it, they have a power to impose a penalty of 2.5 million rupees. The salary, all found salary, given to a member at that time of the district forum was 10,000 rupees. Slightly less than what I paid my chauffeur. And you expect this man to perform the duty where disputes up to 5 million are going to go to him because consumer disputes. So this kind of unrealistic judges' salaries have to go. We need a proper commission to investigate what would be the salaries which would attract suitable legal talent. And we have to fix those salaries. The third issue is about domain expertise. All courts in the world, all good commercial courts in the world have come to terms with domain expertise. I must say, much as we lawyers love to, this time I can't blame the government. The government has done all that they can do. They have given us a modern Commercial Courts Act, they've given us a modern Arbitration Act. Why is it not working? Because we people don't let it work. And I speak so as a member of the Indian Bar. So what's going wrong? Judges, what have we done? We have taken the same courts, the same judges, and changed the nameplate. The same judge, the same court is now a commercial court. That's not what it was meant for. It was meant to attract a different kind of talent. It wasn't done. The rules may have to be changed. We may have, our constitution envisages an all India judicial service. Maybe we should have an all India, time may be ripe to have an all India judicial service for the commercial court. And it can be done, the states can agree, I'm sure nobody will mind, and have a proper selection system. Who will select the commercial court judges? It has to be a panel of experts. It can't be the present system where judges appoint judges. So once we start focusing on these problems, how do we fix the justice delivery system? We need speed and we need certainty. And the second thing about certainty is continuing legal education. I'm afraid for a change, the government has shown its capacity to change much faster than the judicial system. As a senior member of the Supreme Court Bar, I must confess that our Supreme Court judges have been very slow in adapting to new commercial principles and new commercial codes. They have done a good job, but there is no continuing legal education in our system. And for some reason, we Indians seem to believe once you're there, you don't need any further education. That has to change. Our mindsets have to change. We have to realize as lawyers, we are students like a doctor. A lawyer is a student all his life. Our environment changes, ecosystems change, regulatory systems change. Judges have to keep abreast and have to, more than that, tune themselves to what is the philosophy which is driving the country. And that is not compromising independence. As Larry mentioned, you can't have too much independence. You can't say, I will work as a judge, disconnected from the ecosystem in which I'm working. There was one time where we had a socialist ecosystem. The judges adapted to that. Come out of it now. We have realized the follies of the past. We've moved ahead. The governments have moved ahead. Policies have moved ahead. You can't be stuck there. And finally, what is the biggest problem which we are facing? Why do we not have, in the short term, what can we do? In the short term, we have provisions available in the Constitution. You can have temporary judges. You can have retired judges coming back and sitting in a courtroom and deciding cases. We have to, as Indians, rise above our pecking order syndrome. Oh, if a retired judge comes, will he be senior to the existing? Will he be junior to the existing? Which courtroom will he sit in? We have to come to terms that our judicial system is facing a crisis of confidence when it comes to commercial dispute resolution. The government has given us a very modern arbitration law. Does it work in India? I don't think so. It's not really working the way it should. Arbitration is not meant to be the first step in a long journey of litigation. But that's what it has become in India. Partly because, again, the judges have not adapted to how arbitration awards are to be treated. You're not a court of appeal from an arbitration award, but that again is a change of mindset. So unless we focus on all this, unless we look at the points which I must say Larry has, with his experience and wisdom, brought up, accountability, speed, certainty, and real independence of judiciary, internal and external, which mandates, and it's a conversation for another day, how do we change a system of appointment of judges which is more credible, which is more transparent. Thank you.
I think very interesting points have been made with regard to interpretation of laws, with regard to independence of the judiciary, and also having at the same time a mechanism or a system of accountability. The other important point which was made by both the panelists is with regard to the need for faster dispute resolution, especially with regard to commercial disputes, and the need for domain expertise among all stakeholders and all participants in a judicial system. Not only the judges in the commercial courts, but also the lawyers, the advocates who are appearing in the courts, and also the various agencies, including the government, to be in tune with the changes in commercial law, not just within the country but internationally. Now, having said that, let me pose three issues on which I would invite both the panelists to give their comments. One, naturally, we are discussing in India with regard to the Indian legal system and the economic changes which are happening in India. And so how do you see India's legal and regulatory architecture evolving, and what are your thoughts on the way forward? You would all be aware that in the recent years, the government has undertaken significant reforms. I would say landmark reforms in the economic laws of the country, whether it is the goods and services tax, or the insolvency and bankruptcy code, or for that matter, the inflation targeting framework, or for that matter, the FDI policy, and also the criminal law system in the country, which were amended, which were in existence since the late 19th century. So how do you see the the regulatory architecture as well as the legal architecture evolving, and what are your thoughts on the way forward? And here I would also like to suggest that Larry could comment on the British part and perhaps the European continent. Of course, Mr. Salve is also familiar with both of them have great amount of expertise in both these areas. The second area which I would suggest that we could, where I would suggest that the panelists could comment upon, is with regard to the context of, decline in, let us say, the international legal architecture around multilateralism. WTO has become non-functional. International financial institutions, international institutions related to the functioning of multiple economies have also become, fairly not so active, if I can put it that way. So how do you sort of see the international jurisprudence in the current context? And the third, somewhat unrelated to the first two, but very important in today's context, is the issue of data protection and data privacy, which is, I think, uppermost in the mind of every government and every judiciary in the country. So these are the three issues which I would like to pose, and then let's see how it evolves. So could I start with you, Larry?
Sure. Let me say a bit on the first two questions. On the third one, I don't know that I have anything that I could say I could say things, but they wouldn't be intelligent, just because it's so specific on an issue that in India I don't quite know what it is. Just in terms of how to think about whether and what kind of further evolution is needed, as I say, from what I understand, it's really an opportunity moment for India. And the fact that you've had all these reforms is itself part of the opportunity. So what Harish and I were talking about is really getting an institutional framework in place that is very specifically designed for what is the government's top priority, which is generating the kind of growth that is sought to get India into a high-income country over the next couple of decades. That's an amazingly difficult challenge in and of its own. And so the idea that it makes sense to say, with all the reforms that have been made, let's make sure that we have adequate, strong expertise to take care of the legal part of this and make us a very attractive place for investment to come, both domestic and international. And all of the other reforms, as I say, create, to my mind, an opportunity to cap it off by creating a really highly thought through, kind of state-of-the-art specialized court to deal with that issue. To some extent, the weakening of the role of the UK and the EU in playing that role is a part of the opportunity. Likewise, with the decline of multilateralism, I wish I believed that this was a temporary thing and we were going to come back to some sort of strong set of global multilateral institutions. I'm skeptical about that, and I'm certainly skeptical about it for a while, which means going back to, remember, we had a legal system before World War II and before the 20th century, in which there was a lot of international trade and there were commercial disputes. It was obviously on a much smaller scale than we have now, but things were worked out. And the way it worked largely was particular countries were able to develop within their judicial systems the kind of reputation globally that made parties elsewhere in the world want to or be comfortable bringing their litigation there. It attracted investment and dealings as well. So there's an opportunity, in effect, if you can develop the right kind of judicial system, to have the kind of reputation, particularly outside of the kind of Western domain, that people come to trust the Indian courts much as they did the courts of the United Kingdom, or the courts of New York State, actually, is what it was in the 19th century and early 20th century. So again, if you can build the right kind of infrastructure and reputation, it's more than worth the investment.
I would start by, as a lawyer who's been over 4 decades in the game, start by thanking the government for the new trend of replacing old legal fossils with live organisms. A lot of the laws, old archaic laws, some of them written by the British Parliament for colonial India, have now been revamped and brought up to date. But there is always a time lag between Parliament and the political executive, where it has will and direction to make changes, and for the judicial system to come to terms with those changes and change its mindset to align itself with the policy of the law. The reform in economic areas has now brought us to a point where talking of judicial reform is not discussing a luxury. It is a compelling necessity. If we don't do this, I don't see India being able to achieve its dream of Viksit Bharat, and this time it will not be the government to blame. So I think all of us who engage with the legal system need to do something about this. The collapse of the multilateral system shines the beacon light on how do we deal with this in the short term. Once we have courts which have effective justice delivery systems with the two characteristics of certainty and speed, people will not look for bilateral investment treaties to make the investments. I don't think today if somebody is making an investment in the United Kingdom, he's worried about a justice delivery system. He'll just sign a contract governed by English law because he knows it's one of the best legal systems. I believe somebody had done the statistics. 5 out of 10 cases in an English commercial court are not English cases. There are cases between people who have signed up to be governed by English law. So if you have, once you achieve that kind of reputation of your justice delivery system, you will not have to worry. But in the short term, multilateralism having failed, we have to look at bilateral investment treaties to give the kind of assurance and security investors need. We have had some bad experience with dispute resolution and bilateral investment treaty. We need a conversation on that, and we need to fix that. But I think that's the only short-term solution which we can have if we need to bring in pace into foreign investment and provide the kind of certainty which investment of this magnitude needs. And the third, and I'm sorry I keep coming back to this, if we need to improve the quality of our judges, we have seen that the justice, the commercial dispute resolution in the high courts, original side, is far more effective in the sense of inspiring confidence. So we need to convert all our high courts to have an original side. Now, how do we do this? We need a very large number of judges for our high courts. How are we going to get that? And one of the impediments, and people who have written books on judicial independence have also said independence must not only be external but internal. I have known of so many people who have refused high court judgeship because they say, we don't want our future careers to be in the hands of Supreme Court judges. We want to proceed on our own merit, not by depending on whether you curry favor with somebody for an elevation to the Supreme Court. That's one of the things which we need to think about. And we need to strengthen our high courts, create more original side in the high courts, or create an all India cadre service which is equal to a high court for commercial dispute resolution. Otherwise, I don't see this catching up with the pace of investment that we need.
I think taking off from where both Larry and Harish Salveji left, one issue is with regard to capacity building and the quality of the judicial pronouncements. I think both of them have alluded to it. In this context, may I ask, particularly Larry, since you are now heading an eminent academic institution, with regard to legal education, in the context of India or internationally, with regard to legal education, what would be your recommendation, what will be your thoughts on sort of reforming the system of legal education to start capacity building right from the time that a person is in the college, goes on to become an advocate, a lawyer, and perhaps then goes on to become a judge? That is one aspect. The second aspect also, with regard to, again, capacity building and faster dispute resolution, is the issue of use of technology in judiciary. And I'm happy to note that I think in the Indian judiciary, many judges have started using technology, especially artificial intelligence, to sort of in their judicial work. I was having conversation with some senior lawyers and also a few members of various high courts and other superior courts. Many of them these days, I am told, they use AI to have the related cases if they want to see the previous case laws or the the related judgments or orders passed by various courts. Many of them use AI. But one danger, again, a senior lawyer pointed out to me is that the AI also sometimes hallucinates. And one senior judge, one senior advocate told me, a senior advocate in the Supreme Court told me that he saw a reference to a particular, a case law. And he was surprised because he said, in my 35 years of experience, I had not heard about this case. And he went and checked. He found that there was no such case. So obviously, the AI had hallucinated. So that danger is there. So just to sum up, legal education, reforms in legal education to enhance capacity building in the entire system. And number two, use of technology in judiciary, especially artificial intelligence. So floor is open to both of you.
So, thank you. Okay, I could do a whole session on legal education, what I think ought to be done. But so let me just say a couple of things. Traditional legal education has been focused around what we always talked about as teaching someone to think like a lawyer. So it's basically focused around a primary set of skills in terms of how to analyze a case, critical thinking, problem solving, learning to learn, like that. And the way I always thought about it, that should be about the first year of law school. That's not preparing you to be a lawyer, that's preparing you to be a law student. And now we should begin to prepare you to be a lawyer, which begins to layer on exactly the kinds of things that you're talking about. And the devices for it exist. So legal clinics are pivotal while students are in school, where you can take cases, they can work on the cases directly, but not in order to learn the nuts and bolts, because you pick the cases so that they can be managed slowly under supervision and teach them how to reflect on taking what they're learning in their classes and how it applies in a real context. Then you're never going to have somebody come out of law school prepared to practice law fully. There's just not enough time for that. So, of course, the idea after school, much as in medicine, is there ought to be some requirement of some kind of apprenticeship. Ideally, a clerkship if you're thinking about a judicial path, or even if you're going to be a litigator to really work inside a court, but some kind of apprenticeship for a couple of years. With respect to judges in particular, I've always thought the Europeans have a really good system where it is actually a civil service career path. So it functions like any other civil service. It doesn't have the same kind of problems where the judges are too independent, because the civil service itself has a balance of independence and accountability. But one relatively early in a career chooses to take that career path and is really trained to be a judge all along, so that by the time you're appointed to a bench, you have deep expertise in what's needed. Something like that. So the idea is just to be thinking about preparation as a continuing education all along, where groundwork is laid in your time in school, but the education never ceases. The last thing I would just note on technology, obviously artificial intelligence can and will transform legal education and legal practice much as it is going to transform every other kind of education and every other kind of practice. And I think the threats for any knowledge industry like law are bigger than some other industries. The key, though, I wouldn't make too much of the problems that you mentioned today, the problems of making up cases and hallucinations, because that will not exist in 5 years or 10 years, the speed with which this technology is improving. So we really want to ask ourselves, how do we want to use this tool? And the challenge for law is this. The very best lawyers or judges are able to exercise a kind of judgment, that's why we call them judges, a kind of refined judgment that comes from years of experience. That's going to be really difficult to create in technology. The problem is going to be that they only get to that point by years of doing the work that doesn't require that kind of judgment as they acquire it. And that work will be all doable by technology and artificial intelligence. And since the AIs will be able to do that for virtually free or low marginal cost, we've got to figure out how we're going to preserve a system that needs the young lawyers so that we can sift out of every 100 the 1 or 2 who are going to become those really sophisticated lawyers. And that's a huge challenge for the profession going forward, I think. But the answer to it can't be to not use the artificial intelligence, but to really rethink the economics of practice. And as I say, that's a different topic altogether.
Picking up on Larry's last point, I can never forget when my first time when I had the honor and privilege of being led by Mr. Palkhiwala, who's been the greatest lawyer India has ever produced, one of the finest the world has ever produced, where the 42nd Constitution Amendment was under challenge. And at that time, he called me at 5:30 in the evening for a discussion saying, I want every American case on a particular point. So how did I get them? I took a flask of black coffee and I sat in the law library till 8:30 in the morning, going through every digest, every book, the amount of knowledge you pick up that way. So that's what Larry was talking about. If artificial intelligence allows me to give a search command and get everything in 3.5 minutes, some lawyer has lost a chance to do that research. Now we need to balance that. But one thing which I think cries out for repair within my profession in India is equal opportunity. Friends in India call me up and say, I have so-and-so, so-and-so's niece, so-and-so's nephew, so-and-so's son. He has just finished his legal education in London. can you take him as a junior in Blackstone Chambers? I said, no. So, no, but you can take him in your... I said, first of all, it's not my chamber. I'm part of a set of chambers. And secondly, to become a junior tenant in that chamber or even a pupil in that chamber, you have to sit in an exam because there is the equal opportunity rule. Every bright young lawyer must have the same chance of becoming a pupil in Blackstone Chambers. I can't say so, and this nepotism in legal profession doesn't work there. So that is something, that's a change we need to bring in India, where lawyers should be under some kind of regulation that bright youngsters get a chance to work with senior lawyers on an equal opportunity basis. Technology in courts is very, very important, and let me tell you two areas where it will transform hugely. I have seen, we've been struggling in the Indian system to get live transcription. It's been there in the international, in England, it's been there in the US all the time. If you ever go into an Indian trial court, criminal court especially, where the judge is receiving evidence, that judge, even now, dictates what is called the summary of evidence. So the witness says something, and then the judge dictates what he thinks the witness has said, half the time ending up with a wrangle with one or the other lawyer saying, no, that's not what my witness said, or that's not what that witness said. And it's a huge waste of time. I have seen recently, with using artificial intelligence, instant transcripts being created of what is being said. And if that can be provided, believe me, you will cut down trial time by 70%. Because what the witness says goes straight on, it goes verbatim, there is no wrangling about what the witness said, and it's all there, and the transcripts are available. It's done all the time in other courts. We need to bring this in India. And the third huge technological advance which has happened, and I have seen this myself in COVID times, access to justice. In a country like India, if you can have, for the average case, for big cases, of course, in-person appearances are always helpful because you interact with judges. But in a large number of cases, the kind of system which we have created, the virtual court system, has created huge access to justice to an average Indian to get his case heard now in Supreme Court. He doesn't have to come to Delhi, find a local Delhi lawyer, or bring his lawyer from his hometown, pay his travel bills, pay his air bills, pay his hotel bills. His local lawyer, who knows his case from start to finish, logs on to the website and argues the case in Supreme Court. And also psychologically, the lawyers who are not part of the Supreme Court elite clique, they feel more comfortable and less intimidated on a TV screen or on a computer screen than they do standing in person before the judge. So technology has a great role to play. The only thing I want to say, and again, this has to be done, technology in courts should not be an option. It should be a way of life. I have seen a lot of judges say, oh, we don't need all this nonsense of all this technology. Please, it has to become a way of life. Mindsets have to change. We have to make the best we can of the technology to make things faster, to make things easier, and to make things more cost efficient.
I think some very interesting points and takeaways for all of us. Before I open the floor for questions or comments from the audience, I have just one last point which I would like to make, and also would like to have the views of both the panelists. You know, in the recent years in India, we have, the government has launched on simplification of various laws, the various acts. For example, the criminal law amendments, the old CRPC, IPC have all been replaced by new laws, and the language is far simpler. Or very recently, the Income Tax Act, which was about 60 years old, more than 60 years, that also has been, the size of that law has been reduced. The number of sections and provisos and other subsections have also been reduced, and the language is made far simpler with the objective of reducing the possible misinterpretation or the avoiding potential areas for conflicting interpretations. So essentially it boils down to make the language of various acts and rules as simple as possible, so that not only the judges and the lawyers, they understand it, but a common person or a company or anybody who's running a business who also needs to understand what the law of the land is, he also needs to understand. So on this, may I have your comments and observations?
We desperately need simplification of the Civil Procedure Code. The government has revised the Criminal Procedure Code. In England, we had what in English courts are called the Wolf reforms. Lord Harry Wolff rewrote the entire rules of Supreme Court. And the current civil procedure rules are very user-friendly. He started by kicking out all the Latin phrases in the rules. It's plain English. A lay person can read and understand what the rules are. They are effective. They've cut through a lot of the formal nonsense which used to be in the earlier system. They give a lot more latitude to a judge conducting a trial in running the trial efficiently. And for the big cases, there is never a problem. You will have sophisticated lawyers on both sides. For the small cases, user-friendliness is very important. A common man with reasonable intelligence should be able to understand what's going on in a court. That's the change we need in our system. We need to rewrite our Civil Procedure Code in the same way in which we have rewritten all the other codes.
So just a historical point. In the United States, this problem was recognized as a huge issue in the late 19th century, and an organization was created called the American Law Institute, still exists today, I've been a member for more than 30 years, that was charged specifically with fixing this problem. And it worked incredibly well. They did a series of either what were called restatements of the law or uniform codes. And when charged with doing this, the reason they worked was it was a non-political organization. It was put together by lawyers who nevertheless were members across the political spectrum, which was a way of actually ensuring that as they restated the law or made efforts to simplify or change the phrasing, sort of nobody was getting away with sliding in political agendas. When that has happened, they tend to get caught and surfaced as a result and so on. And so over about a 100-year period, it's been an incredibly successful way in which to do this on an ongoing basis. Because to me, that's the key. If you're doing it episodically and having to create new commissions and special commissions every time, it's harder to develop the kind of credibility that's necessary for all of them, and you're often creating bigger fights to get a particular one done. Whereas, as I say, this is an ongoing organization. It doesn't even wait to be asked. Just they'll do a second restatement or a third restatement every 20 or so years just to make sure that they're keeping up to speed with changes in the law.
Thank you very much for all the observations. We are left with exactly 8.5 minutes. So if there are any questions from the audience, most welcome. Yeah, there. Could somebody hand over a mic there? Yeah.
Oh, it's to somebody else at the back, right? You didn't recognize me, it was somebody else. Okay,
please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So thank you very much. That was very illuminating on the courts and the legal architecture. But as economists, there are two types of laws that we've been talking about a lot in India in terms of legal reform. One is relating to labor and the other is to land. Now, in 2019-20, the Indian government took some 29 archaic labor laws and consolidated them into four codes, which were very good, if you just look at the written point. But in terms of implementation, now it's 5 years, you find that very little has happened. So the same thing is true if you take land laws. So for instance, one of the big constraints on land is that you can't actually lease in and lease out land easily because of in the 9th schedule of the Indian Constitution, all the tenancy laws are placed. And unless you have constitutional reform, individual states can pass it. The government of India provided a sort of legal model code, but very few states have adopted it. So my question is to you that once you've passed a law, and it's not necessarily going to come up for litigation, Don't you need a sort of bureaucratic architecture for actual implementation? And I'd really like to hear views on that, because a lot of laws that are passed are not going to come to either High Court or any kind of court.
Yeah, I think we'll take some about 2 or 3 questions at a time and then come back. Yeah, there.
Hi, thank you. Justice Salve makes a very persuasive case that an investment in the legal system would actually help the Indian economy by reducing the costs of risk and investment. We didn't really cover this, but I wonder whether you'd apply the same intellectual framework that you've applied about the value of a Western legal system to China, because China attracts billions in investment, or has for many, many years. It doesn't have an independent legal system. It's quite open about that. So is China the exception that proves the rule, or is there in fact an alternative way to do things?
Yeah, I think one more question, then,
sure,
yeah.
Thank you, sir. So both speakers put a lot of emphasis on quantity and quality of human resources in the judicial system, especially judges. I'm wondering if we should simultaneously not look at something else. When we look at ease of doing business rankings, 2-3 factors holding us back are commercial contractual disputes, property-related disputes, and delays. Should we not be asking who brings largest number of contractual disputes to judiciary? Vis-a-vis property disputes, what is the entity, what are the branches of the state that can make largest difference to property disputes? These are not the courts who define, delimit property rights, earmark them, and protect them. And delays are an outcome. If there is no screening at lower courts level, we see very little screening of cases. If there is no screening of cases, are we not incentivizing strategic manipulative litigation? And what we perceive as something, a problem with the judiciary, might be a problem somewhere else. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll take a crack at 2 of the questions. As far as whether China is the exception to the rule is something which I don't think I have the expertise to answer. But what I can answer is our Constitution promises us a system based on rule of law. So we must find solutions consistent with the rule of law. We pride ourselves as the largest English-speaking democracy in the world. I think that's the label which we stand by, and consistent with that, we must develop our systems. As far as disputes are concerned, you're absolutely right. Contractual disputes, property disputes are the ones which hold back the system. But in one sense, in the commercial world, all disputes are contractual disputes. Screening of cases is something which will come about if the changes are made to the Code of Civil Procedure, like in England, where judges can throw out frivolous cases straight away.
So with respect to the first question, I think the answer would be, I would just say yes. That is, say, in addition to a judicial process that has all of these qualities, a lot of the legal issues are run through an administrative process, which is different, and you need to have the same kind of reliability and quality and so on. So it's not to say reform of this piece solves all of your problems. There may be other issues as well. It is to say, though, particularly in the international context, the dispute resolution, the judicial piece, is hugely important, and it's in the front of people's minds and an obvious thing. So it nevertheless, I think deserves special attention. With respect to the question about China, it's always a risk-return calculation. I mean, even lots of countries that don't have independent or reliable judiciary still get investment. If the potential financial return is large enough, you'll take more risk. China has been seen for a long time to offer incredible opportunities for returns, sufficient to persuade a lot of people to take the chance. What I would say is, if they fixed their judiciary and made it independent, they'd do even better. So the question is not, how do they do relative to, say, India? The question is, would any country do much better with a more reliable judicial system that could deliver the kinds of dispositions that we're talking about? And the answer, I think, is unquestionably yes. And as I say, there are a fair number of controlled studies that make a lot of these comparisons that would support that would include taking into account differences in the economic opportunity side as well. And then, just in terms of other cases, I don't know, I think again, my answer would be similar to the first one. What we were thinking about here is, to the extent that there's a focus on trying to achieve the, 8.7% growth, is that 8.7? Over a long period of time, what are the classes of cases where you'd be most concerned with ensuring the kind of adjudicatory processes that will make that not an obstacle, and in fact make that an attraction? So if it needed to be somewhat, how you define commercial disputes for that purpose would be something that you'd go into in deciding what the jurisdiction of the specialized court ought to be.
We have just one more minute. I see my old colleague, former colleague, raising his hand there. Please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. It's been a wonderful session and very analytical. On the issue of bilateral investment treatment, the BIT of India was allowed to lapse with many countries for two reasons. There was a tail risk that the Indian government perceived at that point of time, that they could land up with very high rates of judgments in terms of the monetary amounts. And B, I think there was a little bit also of this dissonance about the fact that the arbitrators in some of these independent arbitration councils had a kind of a revolving door relationship with firms of whom they were adjudicating. They could also become clients or on their boards, etc. later. The point that I'm trying to make is that the BIT for the Indian government was consciously allowed to lapse because of this distrust with this kind of arbitration mechanism. But it doesn't solve the problem, because on the other side, the private investor does not trust our legal system for the various reasons enumerated of speed, access, predictability, etc. So the point that I'm making for the panel and the response I'm seeking is that in this kind of impasse that operates, is it possible for the Indian government to think of a mechanism by which it allows the BIT to now come up that takes care of the fact that there's a threshold, and up to that threshold, go in for international arbitration if required. Beyond that, say if it is an award which will be, say, more than just as the figure, $1 billion or $10 billion, then it will be subject to the same legal jurisprudence of the domestic laws. Is it possible to have such a hybrid model, is my question, where we take care of almost about, say, 95% of disputes by allowing it to go, because we know that the tail risk is something which can be managed in this mechanism?
Yeah, I think, Mr. Salve, you would like to take it?
I can. India has had some bad experience with bilateral investment treaty awards. I don't want to comment on them because I know what went wrong, which can be very easily fixed. But you have a very valid point, and one of the easy solutions to that point, I think, is just make sure when you sign a BIT, you can agree to an international arbitration, make sure you say the venue will be United Kingdom. And the reason I say this is the most effective control on runaway awards is by the English legal system. The English Arbitration Act gives more powers to judges than any other arbitration act. They have not followed the UNCITRAL model, but the judges know exactly which awards need to be upheld, which awards need to be thrown out. If you want an example of that, there is a case where there was a huge fat award against Pakistan, which was set aside by the English courts. That could be one solution in the short term.
Thank you. With that, we come to the close of this session. I would like to thank Larry Kramer and Hari Salve for being so responsive to the questions and the comments. So thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now begin our parallel sessions at 4:15 p.m. May I request you all to move to the respective rooms.